I think what the message I would give to anyone who's listening, if you're, worried about saying the wrong thing or not, like, just recognize the innate value that you bring and really try to, even if you waver on your belief in that sometimes, like, bring that to the fore. That's the reason I want this industry to change, so that people can come and bring what they have to offer, because that's what's missing. That's the important bit.
Yeah. So I am here with Ella Fryer-Smith, qualitative ethnography film expert. Have I said that correctly? Kind of.
How you want. It more or less gets the gist.
AQR Board Member, D&I champion for years before I even knew what D&I was. I won't say too much about that. Maybe it may sound like I'm calling you old.
Yeah, I didn't think about that until you reaffirmed it with the fact that you were calling me old. But
no,
okay.
but you've done a lot. You've done a lot. You're well known. You created the Unequal Truths podcast, which I was a guest on, very, very proud guest on. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I want to know how you found research, or how research found you. Like, what was the journey getting into this world that we're in?
It was a while ago. Now I feel like I'm just reinforcing my age the whole time.
No.
It was...
We're the same age, I think.
Let's not talk about that. Anyway, so how did I find research? I didn't know what research... I didn't know what market research, to be accurate, was.
Yeah.
I went to university, I went to Brunel in West London, or what I thought was West London, but it was Uxbridge. And
shout out to everyone in Uxbridge. No disrespect.
No disrespect. But it's not really London, is it? Anyway, and I graduated. I did a sort of thin sandwich course, so you do a year, a work placement, another year, another work placement, another year, something like that. Anyway, so I did work placements within I think nothing to do with research. Don't really know why I'm going into this much detail, but I came out the other end and I said I like doing research, as in academic research. So actually, I know why I'm talking about this. My dissertation was about crack. So it was about crack. Okay. So I did some qual research about crack with because I was working on an estate at the time, and so I did. I spoke to crack users, ex-users, crack dealers, and workers, and that was my dissertation. So I knew I liked research, and that was my kind of starting point for research.
How old were you?
How old was I? I must have been 20, early 20s.
And so, early 20s, you're out there interviewing crack users, crack dealers.
I got ethical approval for it. In fact, the Chancellor at the time was a criminologist, and he took me into his office and he said, "How do you know these? How are you finding these people?"
I was going to ask you, how did you find these people?
I went to school in the area. I'm not going to say much more than that. Like I knew people, and I also worked on the project Community Against Drugs project, so I knew the sort of workers from that side as well. So I just
that is such a cool thing to have like started your career on, though. I mean, not crack is not cool, but I mean, like in terms of social impact.
Yeah.
first project you ever worked on.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Thank you. And it was fascinating, and not only was it fascinating, the findings probably still apply to the same cause that I'm talking about today. Well, first of all, legalised drugs, that wasn't particular, or decriminalised drugs at least, that wasn't not what's necessarily applicable to the market research industry right now. However, the second one was about tapping into the entrepreneurial skills of young men, usually, not always, right, who are drug dealers, who don't necessarily have other role model avenues to go down, who are extremely smart, and if they could apply themselves in different ways to different industries, it would enrich those industries, particularly market research, and it was also improve their lives and their life chances. And so that was like one of the big conclusions as well.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I've had the thought often. Like, I know a few people from back in the days who know more than a few people and are very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And you know, particularly in like the work that I do with recruitment, like they know everybody. They know everybody and their mum. Like, they would be perfect, but it's how do we get them out of the mindset that that's easy money and this is hard money, when actually
It's the other way around.
it's the other way around. You know?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that there's loads of untapped potential. But yeah, so that was my dissertation. So I knew I liked research. And I knew I was alright at it. It's quite good. Actually, before that, I worked in domestic violence. So my first workplace was Oxford City Council in the equalities team.
I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that. So that was supporting women, right?
That was supporting, well, it was, so survivors of domestic violence, which were mostly women, unfortunately. Well, not whoever's a survivor of domestic violence, but at the time it was mostly women. And so I sat in that team, which was the equalities team, and I did a piece of research in Oxford understanding what services needed to be available.
Making a serious portfolio from young.
I was trying. I think work placements, to be honest, were really helpful for that, and that was one of the things that put me off going. I was like, 4 years? I want to do 4 years, but actually, I'd say those were really beneficial.
What made you, like, what about your life previously or your interests made you want to go into, because correct me if I'm wrong, you're a lot more into the social research and the sort of causes. And I can tell from that young age, it was straight in there with trying to, change the world through research. Where do you think that comes from?
I think I've always been concerned with fairness and things being fair and being equal, and I could see from a young age that things were not fair and things were not equal. And I think actually growing up in Oxford maybe sort of exasperated that for me, because like I mentioned before, the town and the gown is a real thing, and like until I was like 19 and worked in one of the colleges on my year out, my gap year, I was supposed to go travelling, never ended up going travelling, went raving a lot. So I was a garage, old school garage raver, and worked in one of the colleges as a waitress, where a few college students may or may not have had desserts on their laps a few times and things. But anyway, so I could see that there was a big disparity, and I could see as well, like the university had no real interest in tapping into the local city and those who are disadvantaged in the local area. So they would ship in deprived kids, underprivileged kids from London and show them around. We'd never been inside a college, like we didn't even know. Like, I don't know if you've been to Oxford, but there's lots of multiple colleges, right? And they're all very beautiful, and I appreciate the beauty of them for sure. But they're very walled off. Like, if you don't have access, you can't get in.
It's that elitist thing we talk about when you say Oxbridge, it's Oxford and Cambridge, it's that sort of old money, it's that camp, so I can completely understand that. I was actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking, is there something in this? Because, like, typically, the people that I've met who are passionate about D&I don't come from those sort of wealthy areas, and there's, they can see it because they've lived it, and maybe it's the same for you because, you weren't with the silver spoon lot, but I just wonder if there's an argument for people who are growing up in rich neighbourhoods, because surely everywhere there's the rich part, and then there's the, let's call it the working class part, but the the sort of narrative I've sort of seen is that the people who grew up in this sort of environment never even knew that this was going on. And it's like, well, how? If they're living right next door.
Yeah, where's the cultural exchange there?
Exactly. I don't know, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it would be great to, yeah, like you say, like have cultural exchanges within your own city. And like, I mean, there's some TV shows, aren't there, where it's like rich family, poor family, and I mean, you would, there's a danger that you would like could make it a bit of a, I don't know, I don't know, a bit farcical. So I think it needs to be managed carefully. But yeah, for sure. I mean, they're quite ignorant. I guess from their perspective, why do they need to know?
Why do they need to know? With the world changing the way that it is, how do you feel? How can I word this question in the right way? People's intentions, you know, we talk about things like lip service, we talk about things like, what do they call it, virtue signaling. Obviously it exists. To what extent do you think it's a problem, and how would you suggest, it's a very tough question I'm throwing at you, but maybe like, I don't know, is it a problem, and is there anything that we can do to sort of change it?
Yeah, it is a hard question. It is a problem. Like, it's definitely a problem, right? And there's some high-profile examples of where that gets called out online and stuff with virtual signaling, and it should be called out. I think you don't necessarily. It's not always easy to spot from the outside, right? So if someone's saying all the right things and it appears they're doing all the right things, unless you sort of look a bit further, it's quite hard to know.
Unless you really know them, and it's just tricky.
It's hard. What can we do about it? Just do what you say you're going to do. Like, stop talking about it. Just do, like, take some action.
But I just feel like there's a lot of, and not necessarily in our industry, maybe a bit in our industry, but across industries, there's a lot of lip service and then no accountability afterwards. You know, I saw something on LinkedIn. Remember in 2020 when there's all the black squares? You know, I can't remember who posted this, but they were like, can we have a campaign to track all of the people who posted black squares and see what they've done since, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what a great project that would be. It'd be amazing, right? I posted a black square, by the way. I don't know if I should be, like, embarrassed about that or not, but I did.
I did too. But
although I took it down quickly because someone was like, oh, it's clogging up information where people... Anyway, I was like, oh, I don't know.
I don't know. I thought it was a good premise. And I think people like you and I, we actually do it. We actually try to do things. So I don't think that we would have to worry. But it's the companies that are just like do nothing, but they're going to post it. Or it's like when they change their logo to a rainbow flag.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what have you actually done?
Yeah, and is it just commercialization in some
cases?
Just
marketing?
Right? Yeah. Is it just helping the bottom line? Which, you know, that has been a good argument for diversity, right, along the way, and has got people on board, but that should not be the only reason you're doing these things and taking actions. But if it's going back to my point about, well, just do the thing, just to take the action, like if that gets people to do it, then almost I don't really care that much. Well, I do care what the intentions are, of course, but I think like if they're actually going to make some changes, some changes.
Or if it inspires someone else, even if that one is not genuine, that one might be genuine. I've made the same sort of argument before. It's like, what's the analogy? I can't remember, but you know, it's progress either way. You know, even if it's a giant leap or if it's just a tiny little step that might inspire someone else, it's better than zero.
Yeah.
Maybe. So, all right, I want to jump back to your journey. You know, after these two big projects, what happened next?
Well, I graduated and I knew I liked research, but I thought my only option if I liked research was to be an academic, and I was like, I don't really want to be an academic. It seems a bit lonely, a bit like the same thing all the time. Like I'm the kind of person who got bored on a parachute jump halfway down. Like I can't. Yeah, seriously. I know, right? Then I was like, do I have ADD? Maybe. Not diagnosed, but yeah. So I like the variety of research. Anyway, I keep going off topic, so I'll go back to what you were asking. So I thought the only option was to be an academic. There was a great career service at Brunel, and so I went to the careers service, and they said, "Oh, there's a whole industry called market research, and by the way, Ipsos is down the road in Harrow, and there's other ones." And so I was like, right, Ipsos. For some reason, I just became obsessed with Ipsos. I was like, that's the one I'm gonna try and get to. So, and they have graduate schemes or whatever. So I applied for the graduate scheme, did an assessment centre, was not successful.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't successful.
What?
Well, I can't remember the exact reasoning, but I think they said something about my quant skills, which, to be fair, I can understand.
That's
why.
fair enough.
Anyway, I was like, oh, what am I going to do now? So my dad was quite good. He's like, oh, just keep bothering them. I was like, okay. So I just kept bothering. So I just wrote them a letter being like, I'm really disappointed. I didn't get this place. Please stay in touch with me. Let me know what I can do. And a few months later, they got in touch offering me an executive assistant position, which is a sort of lower ranking in the agency, makeup, and for 6 months, a 6-month contract. So I was like, okay, cool. So I went off and did that. And when I was in there, I just found the qual team and started to network. And I was like, right, I need to be with you guys. Yeah. And then I applied internally for the graduate scheme, and they let me on.
That's wicked. I like that because, I think that resilience is something that is rare. A lot of people would just take that knock back, maybe try another agency or something, but to go back to the same people and say, no, you made a mistake, I want in. That's brave. So you found your people, you found your qual people. What is it about qual versus quant that,
Okay, well, first of all, maths and me are not friends, so that's the first thing to say. Speaking to people, I find I'm a bit of a voyeur. I love watching what people are doing, hence the sort of ethnography and the observation, and going and looking around people's houses, that they wouldn't normally show you. I love all that. So watching people and speaking to people, I'm good at it. Yeah. That's what I enjoy.
Yeah, no, I feel similarly. Not a researcher, but even just recruiting people and dealing with people and hearing the stories, it's way different than looking at spreadsheets and, adding filtering and this, that, and the third,
Yeah.
Okay. So, you're there at Ipsos, you're in the qual team now, they got you on the graduate scheme. How long were you there?
At Ipsos, in total, I think I was there about 9 years, I would say. 9
years.
or 10. Yeah, I was there a long time because I stayed in the graduate. I started off in public affairs, which is the social research side, because that's obviously where my passion was, which was great. I was in that team for maybe 18 months, 2 years. I'm not sure how long. And a woman called Johanna Shapira came over from Ogilvy, New York, and she was an expert in film ethnography, and she was put into that team, and so she sort of selected myself plus a couple of others in the qual team to go, okay, I'll bring you guys on board, and she basically trained us up in film ethnography. And then that became so big that it suddenly became, it was sort of Ipsos Ethnography, and then became the Ethnography Centre of Excellence, and suddenly they wanted us in the marketing team, not the social research team anymore, because it grew quite a lot. And so then I started moving over to a lot more private sector work. I've always done social research throughout, but I did a lot of finance, pharmaceutical, loads of different sectors at that point as well. Then I was there, I stayed there, became an AD, and then got pregnant and left. Well, got pregnant, went on maternity leave, bought a house in Oxford, which is where I'm from, basically. And I knew I didn't want to commute to London, and at the time remote working wasn't a thing, so I was like, oh shit. And I always kind of knew I wanted to maybe do my own thing at some point, and I also had been there a long time. Honestly, I was ready to move on. So went on maternity leave, softly started thinking about what that might look like, and then handed in my notice at the end of the mat leave.
So, first of all, like, when you had the baby and you had that 18 months, during that time, was this where you were sort of plotting what you were going to do afterwards, or was that just sort of like a break away focus?
No, I was making some moves in the background, let's say. So while I was pregnant, I got a life coach, a business coach. Who I just happened to know someone who knew someone who was training. She was like, "Oh, they're looking for clients. Would you be interested?" I was like, "Yeah." So I already knew. You
knew what you was gonna do. And what was it like at the beginning days? Because I know for me, when I started Guinea Pig, it was terrifying, and I didn't have like funding or anything like that. I barely had like 2 or 3 clients that I thought might use me. It was terrifying. What was it like for you?
Yeah, scary. It was not straightforward at all, and not having like a financial security blanket makes it more scary, I think, as well. And I just bought a flat, and I knew I was going to leave my job, and like.
And you just got a new baby.
And I just got a new baby.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot, but. To be honest, I'm trying to remember back to those early days. Now you're asking, what was it actually like? I had quite a lot of good contacts, and the good thing about working in a massive agency like Ipsos is over the years you work with so many people who end up all over the place.
Yeah.
And so when they, I sort of hit up a few old contacts, and when they realise you're freelance, they're like, oh, and that, like, it's a big net, I found, so that was lucky. I also, because I knew I didn't want to travel too much with a small child, I found a woman, Louise Wheeler, who has a company called Research Oxford, which I think she's winding down now, but at the time she was still very much present, and she was sort of a one-woman company as well, and she'd been a director at GFK, which used to have a base in Oxford, I think. So she had this, so I met up with her for coffee, and I was like, so I felt her out a bit, and she was keen to work with me, so I managed to kind of get in there with her, so I knew I had a bit of guaranteed work there. Ipsos was able to give me a fair amount of stuff.
That is nice, because, sorry to interrupt you, but I won't say too much about my own experience, but I've seen it with others, like you leave somewhere and then it's like, well, fine, then that's it, we're not going to be, if we're not together, then we're against each other, and it's good that they were like...
Yeah, that wasn't my experience at all, and actually I helped to support the Ethnography Centre of Excellence in America, so in the early days, actually, that was one of the biggest things for me, which was great, and because they set up a new team, so I was able to like help out based on the experience that I had in the UK. I even helped to train teams in Dubai and Paris and Shanghai. I can't remember now, it was a while ago, but so I've definitely kept a close relationship with Ipsos. I still have a close relationship with them, still do work with them to this day. So so I got lucky. It was kind of much easier than I imagined.
It's not lucky because you obviously had to build that network.
Yeah.
But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the key to it was the networking.
Absolutely, like LinkedIn. Yeah. Like I never really, I did kind of use it. Luckily, I'd randomly over the years just added people, but I'd hardly gone on. But yeah, I would say if you're an independent, like use those networks. Yeah, it's everything. Use those networks. Your network
is your net worth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I think that's the case. So the reason I also had a good network outside of Ipsos as well is I pushed myself when I was there to do a lot of conference presentations, to often talking about EDI related stuff. So I always put myself out there to the broader industry in a way that I don't think everyone necessarily does, so I kind of had a bit more of a built up network already as well outside of that.
I want to touch on that actually, because I think I'm quite similar in that although I do suffer imposter syndrome like most, I've kind of got I don't know. I don't want to call it a cockiness or a arrogance,
Are you sure,
but there's
Theo?
some sort of.
You don't want to call it that. Call it what it is.
No, I mean maybe there's an element to it,
Yeah.
but there's also an element of it's not fearlessness, it's courage, right? It's bravery,
Yeah.
and you're right. You don't see many people doing that. You see a lot of people second guessing themselves and oh no, I better not. Maybe someone else is better. What sort of what do you think that is in people, that some people just have that, and then for those people who might not have that but feel like they do have something to say, what sort of words of wisdom would you give them as someone who has for many years now, not too many, really done that?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll start by saying I also get imposter syndrome. I think that most people do, so it's not always, a straightforward, easy thing like, oh, I can just do that. So I just want to make that clear first of all. In terms of what, and then I'll answer both questions sort of simultaneously, I think. I believe everyone has something to offer. Everyone, right? Because we're all unique individuals and we all have something to say, whether we say it in public or not, we all have something to say and we all have something to offer. And for me, joining an industry where I didn't really see many people talking about the things that I thought were important with regard to the industry spurred me to go, well, I'm going to say it because no one else is. Why is no one else saying it? And here's what we need to be talking about this. And I got a little bit of airtime. I took these things to MRS conference and various places. But realistically, there wasn't any kind of underlying force or underlying, group mentality around that in this industry or many other places, to be fair. So until 2020 and Black Lives Matter, it's sort of got a lot more traction, which is obviously good.
I hear what you're saying, and I think I feel kind of similar. It's not even just about I feel like this and I think no one else is saying it, so I'm going to say it. It's kind of like a responsibility because no one else is saying it. Someone has to say it, and
well, they don't, and they didn't for a long time. They don't have to. So maybe there is something innate in me, and I've always been encouraged to have a voice. So and I have
from childhood.
From childhood, yeah.
From parents.
Yeah,
what are your parents
my
like?
My parents are musicians. They're like hippies. Basically they're musicians, and they've always. I've been, I had a very child-led childhood, shall we say? I could basically, just be me. So I've always only ever known that, really, I guess, growing up. And so when I come into a space, that's still who I am, and I'm like, and what's going on here then? And oh, well, wait, what? And so I will say stuff. I think what the message I would give to anyone who's listening, if you're worried about saying the wrong thing or not, just recognize the innate value that you bring and really try to, even if you waver on your belief in that sometimes, bring that to the fore. That's the reason I want this industry to change, so that people can come and bring what they have to offer, because that's what's missing. That's the important bit.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's funny because I talking to you about it, it's like bringing different, because sometimes I worry that, I didn't expect when Core was launched and when I sort of went out on my own that I would get a little bit of face. I didn't expect to get as much now, and I kind of feel like, what if I say the wrong thing, or I change my mind later on based on new information. There's this sort of expectation, I think, from people that when someone stands up on a soapbox and speaks, then that has to be their views at all times. There's no change, and I worry that that's actually a bit dangerous, and maybe it's one of the things that holds people back from speaking out, because they're like, well, if I say the wrong thing or if I'm mistaken in anything, then I'm going to be a laughing stock.
Yeah, I can understand that as well, but I think, we're a research industry, right? We know humans are flawed, we know people change their mind. It shouldn't be a big deal. And also, as more information comes available, it should never be this is what I stand for, I'm rigid, I'm this. Like, no, be flexible. We're human. Like, be like.
And we're research industries. You just said it there. It's what we do. It's what we would do.
It's to be expected. So why would we, stand there and say, oh, how dare you?
Yeah.
Like,
I love it. So, when did the whole AQR thing happen, and how did that happen?
So the AQR, so it's funny. The AQR, I've always been a member of since I joined the fore team at Ipsos, because you automatically got joined as a member. I didn't know what they were at all. I just started receiving their newsletters, and one day I saw there was this AGM, and I was like, can I go to that? I want to go to that. I want to see what this is about. So I went, and they had really nice free drinks and really fancy foods, and I love food, and so I kind of went and just enjoyed the atmosphere, and I didn't really know that much more, but I've always kept, and then I saw, oh, they do conferences, cool. I always put myself forward for conferences. I want to go and talk, and they had them in like Rome and Budapest and places like that. I was like,
nice.
yep, okay, I'm going to do that. So I've sort of had a relationship with the AQR over many years, and they were looking. I think it was probably during the pandemic, actually. So at the start of the pandemic, my business went a bit quiet. That was one of the scary, times for me. It quickly improved, I'm pleased to say, but it was a bit rocky at the start there. And so I thought, okay, I need to sort of, how can I get reconnected? And so I debated standing for the board around that time. I think I spoke to Chloe. And then the deadline passed and I'd missed it and I'd forgotten. I was like, oh shit. She was like, I thought you were standing. I was like, oh, I forgot. I forgot to do it, I'll be honest. Like, there was a lot of stress around that time. It was a pandemic, I was homeschooling, you know what I mean? So anyway, so I didn't do it, and then so I thought, right, the next year I'll make sure I do it. And I wanted to do it, from a bit of an EDI perspective, and I made a manifesto that sort of spoke to that, and I was looking forward to the election. And they were like, oh, we don't need an election because not enough people have stood, so you're automatically on the board. I was a bit disappointed. I was like, kind of wanted to be like wanted and to be voted in, or not wanted.
They didn't have to say that. They didn't have to say that.
Well, anyway, that's how I got on the board, people. I'm not going to lie. I put myself forward.
That's the only one.
By default.
Oh, that's terrible.
But no, I mean, and so I've only been on the board, I think, coming up to, about a year now. And have I achieved what I wanted in terms of EDI? No. What do I think is so I think before I joined the board, they did a number of like specific events on this topic, and some of which were really good with some really impressive speakers, but I don't think they had much uptake. And so I think they were like, oh, we think we should be saying something, we're not really sure what to say. And so I kind of just stood back and said, what I think we should actually do is just look at everything and not hold any particular events if you don't have a particular stance on it. Like if one comes up, great, but actually just like, let's look at the processes, let's think about EDI at every level of everything that you're doing, so that actually it's all just baked in, as opposed to like, oh, we stand for this, or we're going to do, and so that's the process we're going through.
It goes back to what we were talking about originally with virtue signaling. I'm not saying that that's what they are doing, but I do feel like for the larger organizations, AQR, MRS, these, it's almost like, well, we have to say something because we can't just be quiet. So and it's like, yes, you do have to kind of show up, but then if it's not, if it's meaningless, then it's almost worse than not saying anything at all.
Yeah, and so I think it's just making sure that everything within the organisation is running as it should be, and those considerations are being thought about. And Keisha Andrade, who was on the board before me, I think she helped to set up a lot of the events. She did a really good job. Got some great speakers along with, I think, Oliver Sweet as well. They worked together to do that. So
because you mentioned that when you first heard about them, you didn't know what they did, and to be honest, I've known about them for years, but I don't know the ins and outs of actually what the purpose is. I know that there's the directory, and I know that there's events, but is there anything like you know, behind the scenes and what's going on?
So training is a big part of what the AQR do. So like I think I like should be the gold standard of like excellence around all things qualitative research and thought leaderships, and they have like a magazine, and so I think training is like their big thing. And certain events, like there's going to be an event on recruitment next week.
Oh man, I wish I could make it.
Yeah, I'll be there. And I'm doing a safety initiative, so I've just started, well, I don't want to say too much about it, but something will be coming around qualitative researchers' safety, which is another sort of
What in terms of what? In terms of like meeting the public, or in terms of like what?
Yeah, all of it. So personal safety, how do you keep researchers safe? Like, you know, often it's lone researchers, often female, often quite young if they're junior, physically, you know, going into people's homes, or you don't know what awaits you. And like when I was a younger researcher, I'll go anywhere, and I really didn't care, and I didn't really even think too much about it. But I think every qual researcher has at least a few stories to tell of things that have happened to them.
I hear that. And maybe I'll throw in another idea for you, and maybe this is already happening, but you know how like with therapists, they have to actually, after each session, have a session for themselves to actually offload. I don't know if this happens, but...
but that's also another part of it, right? What you're researching as well, like mental well-being.
I was interviewing terminally ill cancer patients, and I'm calling person after person and hearing these stories, and I remember after that project it was just like, you know, and yeah, I'm fine, but I think for people who are doing project after project, particularly, you know, social projects and issues like that, it's a lot of weight to carry.
It is,
and I've never seen any sort of like, after you've done this many projects you get this time off to recoup, you know.
Yeah, so that's definitely part of it, like the mental well-being of researchers, but also recruiters, right? You're encountering people and their life stories, and it's real life. It comes back to this, like, we're human point. It's all real life. It's real things happening to people. You know, there's a lot of stuff we have to take on board, and at the moment, you know, there's a few pieces of good practice around, but I don't think there's anything really comprehensive that like pulls that all together. So that's the idea. Stay posted.
You've segued into my next question I wanted to ask you, which is, you know, from what you can see across everything that's going on in the industry, what do you think, where are we succeeding, where are we lacking, and where are we going? Where do you see the future of our industry ending up with all of these new initiatives and what's the word I'm looking for? You know, things of importance. There's an actual word for that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. So it's a hard question. Where are we at now? I think, you know, as we've discussed throughout this chat, we are making we're further along, particularly when it comes to EDI, than we have been up until this point, so that's good. Can we do more? Yes, everyone can always do more. I mean, AI and new tech is obviously like shaking up everything and will continue to do so, so I'm interested to see like what happens next. And
are you worried that, you know, all this technology might, well, it is already, but might go too far into taking away the human element?
No, I think there's always a need for that human element. I don't think it's either or. I think it's and.
Interesting.
And I think the human element's needed, because again, I don't know why I keep coming back to this, but we're all fundamentally human, and you need the human touch, and it's interesting as well. You know, thinking about projects. It's often talked about, you know, subjectivity of the researcher and what you bring, and that's why you need the research industry to be a diverse place, right? Because we all shape everything that we do based on where we're coming from, and you know, so I guess one could argue that tech sort of takes that out a little bit, but for me that would be lacking then. Like bringing yourself to the research is an important part of that, just recognizing maybe what the limitations might be of that within what you do.
Using it to complement rather than to replace.
Absolutely. Also just owning it. Like I am going to bring my stuff, I am going to bring my biases or my whatever. Okay, because of that I need to say this and this to compensate for it. But like you would lose the interest and the intrinsic, humanness of the process if humans got wiped out. That's why I don't think it will happen. I'm not worried.
So leading back to I think I knocked the mic. Where are we going? Where's the industry going?
Where we going? I would like the future to be a place where people from all walks of life, first of all, know what their industry is, because I didn't, know that it exists, and not only know that, have clear avenues and pathways to access and enter the industry and make a difference and make it the best it can possibly be, because there's some great people in the industry already as well. Like, let's all bring others in and make it even better.
I want to add to that and say, also make it an attractive industry, an industry that young people aspire to be like. We need TV shows showing the cool side, because it is the coolest job in the world. Like, it's the job that changes the world.
Yeah, exactly. But for me, that's part of knowing what it is. That's like comes in there. It's like, well, I had no idea you could like travel the world. That really appealed to me. I'm not gonna lie. As a young person, I was like, what? I could go and they'll pay for me, and I can eat in fancy restaurants and company credit card and things like that. Like that, those might be small things, and they're just part of it. But like, and seeing people and experiencing different cultures, like I agree,
learning
and making a change, and not just you don't have to. Be passionate about societal change necessarily, like changing what this coffee cup looks like, you know what I mean? Changing whatever, but there's got to be some level of interest for people, no matter where their like heart lies.
Well, it's funny, when I had the interview with Lucy Foyland, she mentioned like, the things that sometimes she thought she would be really interested in. You do a project and it's like, man, and the things that you would think are not interesting,
absolutely,
you learn so much, and it's like, those are the things that when you go and meet people, say, hey, did you know?
And how generous people are, right? If you can build a rapport with people and they let you into your home, and I think especially with methodologies like ethnography where you're spending more extended periods of time with people, like the things people have told me, beggars belief. Like, it's like they will share very intimate things with you, and it might be nothing to do with the toilet paper that you're there to talk about, or whatever the random subject it is, you get to see. And I think the power of that type of methodology where you're in context, you're experiencing people's environments, you're encountering the people they encounter on an everyday basis, you're seeing those things live in action, like all of that is so important for everything else. And it's good industry.
It's a good industry. It's a very interesting industry. Last question for you, because we are literally melting.
I know.
Here
I hope
in
I'm
the
not
sun.
sweating too much.
I appreciate it. It's we're in England, so for anyone watching who's just starting out in their career, what would be your top 3 bits of advice?
So the number one piece of advice I would say is be yourself. But I'd nuance that to say this whole like narrative around bring your whole self to work. Like, if you don't want to bring your whole self to work, you shouldn't be forced to do that. So I'm slightly conflicted around that whole narrative.
Can you like elaborate on that a little bit? Like, what? Give me an example of a situation where someone might not want to bring their whole self.
Well, it might not feel safe or appropriate to always bring your whole self to work, and for sure I could definitely relate to that. And so I think like there should be the space created for people to be able to bring as much as they want of themselves to work, as opposed to sort of like this big expectation, bring your whole self to work. It's like, really? No, I don't know, do I really? So I just think there needs to be a bit of nuance around that language, but certainly in terms of employers, the onus should be on them to make it as open, safe and inclusive as possible. But so be yourself and recognise the value that you bring, really, is the key message there.
Yeah, we've spoken about that before. It's like everyone has, maybe a USP is too strong a term, because who's unique in this world of billions of people, but at least you've got qualities that are rare,
Yeah.
that if you bring those to the forefront, it's going to make you more special.
Yeah, and you bring the value, like that's the value you bring. Who you are is what you bring to the table. So I think own that.
So be
as
yourself
much as possible.
as much as possible.
The second one is to not be shy, to come forward. Like when you enter a new job or space, talk about the things that you noticed. You're coming in with an outsider's perspective, and the questions you ask might be shake people into doing something in a new, radical, exciting, better way than they've been doing it unquestioningly for a long time. So speak up about what your needs are as well, in terms of what's going to help you to function the best you can, and sort of try to own that as much as possible, so it's related to the first point. And the third tip I would give to someone trying to enter the industry, illustrate your interest in the world around you, illustrate your interest in people. This profession gives you an opportunity to probe into people's lives and their worlds, and see so much. So just think of how you can illustrate that's a passion, that's something you're interested in. It could be a small thing, a small example, just talking about friends and family, or whatever. But even if you don't have the experience, draw in on your life and the experience that you do have, and bring that to the fore, because really it's fundamentally about an interest in people in the world around you.
You've got to be curious. Do you think that that's something that also grows with you? Because I feel like maybe there's an expectation that unless you are this nosy type of person from the offset immediately, then maybe research isn't for me. And actually, you could start off, say, 30-40% nosy, and as time goes on, get more and more interested. Or
it might be that you're just a very empathetic person and you're really good at listening, or it might be that you're just a really great communicator, right? That's key, that's fundamental in so many levels of the job that you have to do as a researcher. So it's not just about being a nosy person. You don't necessarily have to, but it helps.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, well look, Ella, it's been a pleasure.
Thank
you so much for coming down.
I'm gonna go and find an ice bath to jump into now.
Well, we got some work to do anyway, off cam, but thank you for joining.